There was other big news yesterday. There was a lot of big news yesterday, don't get me wrong, but these are just some of the biggest ones that really stuck out to me here. We've got to discuss, of course, the DK Metcalf sweepstakes. News broke about 1 hour after it was announced that Tyler Lockett was going to be let go. You can see the tweet up on the screen here from Tom Pelissero, again getting a ton of screen time on today's show with his tweets. Two-time Pro Bowl wide receiver DK Metcalf has requested a trade, and the Seahawks have agreed to explore options, sources tell me in Rap Sheet. Days before free agency, the 27-year-old Metcalf immediately becomes the top receiver available, and I could not agree more. In a class of wide receivers where there's just so many uncertainties surrounding, it feels like all the top guys, whether it's age, injury, production over the last year or two for the wide receiver, this is not necessarily the prettiest wide receiver free agent market. And when Chris Godwin is your top guy, and don't get me wrong, big fan of Chris Godwin's game, but coming off of the injury that he's coming off of and just having what seems like a bit of an injury issue now with the right leg that he has, it is a little bit scary. If he gets back from that and he manages to get out of Tampa Bay this offseason and he hits the free agent market and he's fine, I mean, I'm here for it. I like Chris Godwin. I think he's great. But DK Metcalf, 6'4", 235 pounds, 4.3 speed. Like, come on. Like, the dude is a mountain of a man and moves like he's 5'11" and maybe 200 pounds soaking wet. So it's unbelievable that you have the opportunity to get a guy like this for any team that needs a wide receiver right now. 438 career receptions, 6,324 yards, got 48 touchdowns to boot. He is coming off of what I would argue like is his least productive year since his rookie season. Maybe not yardage wise, but when you look at like yards to touchdown ratio and every other season, the closest example would be like his first initial season. And it just kind of feels like he may have fallen a little bit out of the pecking order with Jackson Smith and Jigba really stepping up and looking like the premier number one wide receiver over there in Seattle. And it looks like there is a bit of a shift going on with that offense there. So him potentially stepping out on Seattle and being traded to somewhere else honestly seems somewhat realistic to me in my eyes. I feel like trying to keep a wide receiver in the building that does not want to be there, and it doesn't have to do with the money that they're being paid, just typically never really works out. And you don't want that kind of tension in the locker room. You want people that want to be where you are. So this is something that I do think leads to an inevitable split. But the big thing that I'm really curious about is just what the compensation is, because and literally this morning I'm at the gym just scrolling through my phone in between sets, and I'm seeing that Seattle's looking for a first and third round selection for the draft this year for the services of DK Metcalf. And last night when I was thinking about this and writing in my notes here, I have noted, a high second round or like low first round pick seems like within the ballpark, because you also have to consider there is the extension that is going to need to be paid out to DK Metcalf because he's on the final year of that deal. So you're looking for something along the lines of probably $30 million a year. I believe that's been reported as well, in the ballpark of what he wants to see. That's where the wide receiver market is going right now. And, a lot of people will have you believe that DK Metcalf isn't necessarily the greatest wide receiver in the world. And it's kind of funny because the numbers that he has put up are very similar to a Randy Moss through the first 6 seasons of Moss's career. So I don't really see why people wouldn't feel that way. The problem is just, again, the draft compensation plus the contract extension does muddy the waters of this potential deal a bit. Looking at teams that make sense to me in my eyes, the first one we have to discuss is, of course, the Green Bay Packers, just because this is already kind of rumored to be in the works, and it's something that's been discussed and something I've seen get thrown around a lot the last week or so. Obviously, Green Bay has Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, and Dontavian Wicks, but no true number one wide receiver. You have a ton of guys that are like number two ABs, just really strong, good wide receivers, but they're not quite that number one. And DK Metcalf, in my eyes, could be that final piece of the puzzle. And also, with Green Bay, you have the opportunity to maybe offer up if you really wanted to. And I know a lot of people are saying Green Bay has to pick with the draft in Green Bay this year. While, yes, that is true, you don't necessarily have to make a pick on draft day. If this is something that between now and the draft doesn't get dealt, maybe we see that draft day trade for DK Metcalf from Green Bay, so you still get to like make the selection on draft day kind of deal. Like that would be a fun way to do that in my eyes. But I like the idea of him going to Green Bay, and you can offer up one of these wide receivers to be able to facilitate that trade. So this way you're only giving up a first-round pick and maybe a body, as opposed to a first-round pick and a third-round pick plus the $30 million extension. Then you got to figure out what you're going to do with one of these 4 wide receivers, because while it's nice to have 5 wide receivers in the room that you could probably count on, there is a point where you have that does get clogged up, and it becomes an issue down the road eventually. But I really like the idea of Green Bay. Another team that's on here, but this is more so out of their necessity, but is probably not going to happen based on the reporting that I've been seeing, and that's the New England Patriots, who, in my eyes, don't even really have a clear number 2 at this current moment here. I do think there probably is a number 2 on that roster, and it's probably Pop Douglas, but beyond that, there's really not a whole lot in the cabinet, or at least not a whole lot of known in the cabinet right now. So this one is just kind of an obvious talking point in my eyes, but the rumors and the reports are that Josh McDaniels doesn't see him as a fit in the system. And as somebody who works in the New England media market for the Patriots, I will say this, not for the Patriots, but with where the Patriots play. Don't want to misrepresent myself there, but I do work within New England sports media, and I've got to say, listening to some of the talk show hosts rattle off their disbelief that the New England Patriots are kind of willing to point their nose in the air to people because they don't think their scheme fits is a little bit crazy to me in my eyes. I understand Josh McDaniels' system is a little bit more complicated. It typically requires more sophisticated route runners, but at the same time, we're talking DK Metcalf, who immediately becomes a legit number 1 threat with his size, his speed, his potential upside with production in that offense. And I mean, you want to talk about Drake May and his style of play, and we saw a lot of it from him last year, his willingness to put the ball up and let a receiver go and get it. Like, DK Metcalf is literally that guy. He is a physical beast when it comes to the point of attack when getting the football. So it's like, I love the idea of it, but to hear that the Patriots might be out because McDaniels doesn't see him as a scheme fit is just kind of crazy to me. Another team I have, they don't have a quarterback, and that is definitely something that needs to be addressed, and partially why I'm not super sold on this one here, but it does bring up the conversation of if they target a quarterback through free agency or maybe a trade or something over the next few days. The Raiders. Yes, you don't have a QB, but you do have Brock Bowers. You do have Jacoby Myers. Brock Bowers emerging as possibly the best tight end in the NFL already after one season, earning All-Pro honors his first year. But then you also have Jacoby Myers, who he's one of the best number 2s in the NFL in my eyes. And this is somebody that, going back to the Patriots, I cannot believe they allowed him to walk and then opted to go with Juju Smith-Schuster instead, who had one knee. So Jacoby being one of the best number 2s in the NFL, 1,000-yard receiver last year, Brock Bowers, 1,000-yard tight end last year. You have the opportunity now to throw in a guy like DK Metcalf, who, yes, maybe didn't eclipse 1,000 yards this year, but is a 1,000-yard receiver and is very productive when he's the focal point of the offense. Could you imagine that trio to work with? You find a quarterback, maybe it is the Sam Darnold, maybe it's somewhere, Justin Fields is the other rumor, or Russell Wilson, depending on who Pittsburgh opts to kind of stick with there. Like, there's a lot that you can really have done over the next few days that can solidify your quarterback and make you okay with sending your first round selection over to Seattle to go and get a DK Metcalf. That when, again, you just have to get a running back at that point too, and you're off and running. You have yourself a pretty legitimate offense to run going into the 2025 season. So I'd love to see the Las Vegas Raiders with DK. Plus, DK Metcalf, don't get me wrong, I'd be excited to see him in a Patriots or Packers uniform, or even some of the other 2 teams here, but DK Metcalf in the silver and black, come on. Let's be real here. That would be disgusting, and I'm talking a good way. Another team I have on here is the Broncos. I'd say maybe the least likely of all the teams I have here. You obviously have Courtland Sutton. You have Denzel Mims, who's the big deep threat home run hitter kind of guy for you. This is more so just me kind of in love with the idea of giving Bo Nix, who had a really strong rookie campaign, and giving him because Courtland Sutton is a number 1, and you bring in DK Metcalf, and you're basically working number 1A, number 1B at that point, depending on the week, and you have yourself a legitimate threatening trio of wide receivers. But this is one of the least likely, but just this was more of I would love to see this kind of thing. And then, of course, I have the Chargers, which feel like a logical landing spot for him as well. as we talked about already previously when we were discussing Joey Bosa, you go in, you bring yourself Ladd McConkey, DK Metcalf through trade. You shore up and this was something courtesy of Daniel Jeremiah that I saw him point out on his podcast, and I actually really love, because you have the O-line. You have the head coach. You go get DK. You now have the wide receiver room. Tight end does need a bit of an upgrade in my eyes. But then if they somehow manage to land Omarion Hampton in the draft out of UNC, holy smokes. Are you kidding me? Like, come on. That is an offense that I would love to see battling in the AFC West with the Chiefs, with this up-and-coming Broncos team. Like, there's a lot to be excited about if you saw DK come in here and then they're able to land like one of those premier running backs, because Jim Harbaugh, he loves to run the ball. He loves to set the tone. And if you want a guy like, and Hampton had a fantastic combine, and there were reports coming out that maybe some teams even maybe have slotted him above Ashton Genty as the top running back in the draft class. The way I see LA right now, you go and somehow get DK and you can still draft Hampton as well. That would just be unbelievable work right there by Los Angeles, and that is a playoff caliber offense in my eyes. One that could absolutely beat you in a submission on the ground, but you can confidently air it out with a guy like McConkey and DK with Justin Herbert behind a very strong offensive line that unfortunately dealt with injuries last year. If they're healthy, like, that's an offense I'm not trying to mess with if I'm any defense in the NFL.